health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health TV and radio show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of three. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below so you're notified every week with my new podcasts on Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you haven't already, join my free group coaching on Telegram. There's no downside. With the link below, I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health. And you will be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your journey, in addition to truly taking control of your health. And I will be coaching on a lot that we're going to be covering today, where your head is going to be spinning, going, wait, that makes a lot of sense, but I completely forgot what she just said. And my coaching takes you through it so that you get it really down deep into the fibers of your body, so you change this into a lifestyle. We have Teri Cochrane back on the show, my favorite guest, as a dedicated clinician, advisor, and speaker. She is the amazing author of the Wildatarian Diet, which I highly recommend. She advises everybody, and she's blowing up for a reason, because her methods are not talked about and they are groundbreaking. Welcome back, Teri.
Hi, Sara. Thank you for that generous and warm introduction. So happy to be with you again. And you're right. We gotta tell a new story, because the story keeps changing.
The story keeps changing. And I love that you just said that. So I want to start with this. In my own family, and like I've said a million times, God gives me issues in my family so that I'm forced to understand them, right? So I've got a 53-year-old man, I've got a 16 and an 18-year-old daughter, I've got a 20-year-old son, and I've got the 47-year-old female. So we've got the broad spectrum of who to test on, and I can tell you the topic today, unexplained weight gain. This is going on in my house, and my house eats Wildatarian, and we're going to get into the diet and the specifics and how just calories in, calories out don't work, and eating chicken and broccoli don't work, because even my husband was watching a bodybuilding show on TV on Netflix, and these guys are supposedly not taking steroids, and they're looking cut, and they're 3% body fat, and they say they're eating chicken, rice, and broccoli. And he wants to throw in the towel and say, well, maybe I should go back to chicken. So this brings up, like, first was the low-fat diet, and okay, if we go ketogenic, then we're going to get the weight loss. Well, that might not be right. So our heads are spinning. So I don't even know where to start. Number one, why don't you tell everybody that the chicken and the low-fat poultry that we're putting on our salads with the dressing on the side might not help with our unexplained weight gain?
Yes. So chicken, I call the dirty bird, as you know. It's gotten dirtied in the way that we grow our chickens. And so why am I such a megaphone for the dirty bird in terms of it not being on your plate? Well, many of the functional practitioners, including Asprey and others, are saying, hey, look, this has omega-6 inflammatory fatty acids, and those aren't good because they oxidize in our system, and that's bad. But what is really the differentiator with the dirty bird, and this is where I believe I'm pioneering, is that the crowding conditions of the chicken have made these amyloid-like structures in their tissue, and amyloids are indigestible proteins. And so why does that have to do with fat if we're talking protein? Well, because proteins are broken down, our body takes proteins and then they're broken down into amino acids, which are then recombined for, guess what? Sugar metabolism And insulin metabolism, amino acid utilization, has to do with how we then use glucogenesis, which has sugar, our sugar balance, and our insulin balance. And so when it takes 5,300 amino acids so we eat a protein, they get all broken up, the amino acids, and then they have to recombine in a certain chain of 5,300 to make one little muscle fiber strand. And we know that muscle will burn fat, right? So if you can't break those down and recombine them into a muscle fiber, you're going to have more fat than muscle. And then if you can't combine those amino acids for glucogenesis, which is how you manage sugar, then the body's going to go hypoglycemic, meaning low blood sugar, which then what's the body going to do in response? It's going to release cortisol, which I call the dirty cupcake, and or epinephrine. Both of those are stress hormones because we're hypoglycemic. And what is stress? What does epinephrine do? It raises our blood sugar, and so does cortisol. So it's a body's balancing mechanism to get sugar back in because you're hypoglycemic because you couldn't break down the protein because you couldn't make those amino acids go to glucogenesis. Well, then what happens? I call it the dirty cupcake. It's like eating a cupcake every hour and it's dirty because it's not really even tasting good. You're stressed. So that dirty cupcake is going to then create fat. Also, over time, that fat then becomes, what is insulin? Insulin is the fat storage hormone. When you're not breaking down fat, now you're not breaking down insulin. And when insulin is not broken down, it's going to be carried around your middle section. And middle section in girth is really related to heart disease, which is the #1 killer of men and women in the United States. So you have this like massive trajectory. So the chicken, I have not had, honestly, with Girl Scout honor, I've not had one piece of chicken in almost 7 years. So we can do this, folks. It's easy. I love my food. Tonight I'm having a white fish with some beautiful salad and some roasted squash and some amazing figs for dessert. So that's going to be my dessert. And I'm going to feel very satiated. And wild meat is the differentiator. So what can you do instead of chicken? You can do Cornish game hen. You can do duck. Pheasant is almost chicken-like. I do roasted pheasant, and you can't tell it's not chicken. The Cornish game hen is in most grocers, and they don't seem to have the same burden of the amyloids. And we know why, because we've proven it through our client transformations today. And I was telling Sara before we went on screen that I had a client. She came to see me. She'd been researching. She's a massive documentarist, producer, very well known. And she'd had an autoimmune condition for 20 years and 2 additional autoimmune conditions for 5 years. And she was eating chicken and broccoli. And chicken also will turn on viruses. And these autoimmune conditions race on a viral load. So in one visit, she's lost 10 pounds and she's no longer has 3 autoimmune conditions. Now, how is that possible? Because we gave her amino acids an opportunity to be used because we stopped that which was not being able to be broken down in the system. So that's one thing. So chicken is the dirty bird. Now, fat metabolism. So this is where keto gets really tricky, especially for women. If you're not able to break down fats, then taking in a high-fat diet will also strain the liver in all hormones, which are fat soluble. And then that estrogen is going to be worn, that insulin is going to be worn, that cortisol is going to be worn. So we have to know what our genetics are and then use fat emulsifiers such as salt, bile salts, taurine, charcoal, vitamin C, things that are emulsifiers that will betaine, that will break down fats. So we need to understand our genetic blueprint to understand that. And then you asked me, why are we having this unexplained weight gain? Well, the spike protein.
Real quick, Teri, before we get into that, I want to stop and ask. So you're talking about when we're eating the amyloid proteins, it's creating the dirty cupcake by releasing our stress hormones. Yes, we're all being stressed, right? We've got fear and all this stuff, but you're talking about just from eating the chicken, the stress hormones are going up. Not to mention the mental and emotional stress that is raising those stress hormones as well. And then those proteins from that chicken that we think we're going to take in after we have a big workout in the gym to go feed our bicep muscles, they're not even going to our bicep muscles. They're not even being broken down. So I just wanted to confirm that and emphasize that. So what we think we're doing is not even doing what we're doing, plus all the damage it is doing on top of that.
Yes. And so I worked with a very well-known athlete who went back into the ring in 2020 to do a champion boxing fight. And his body, we made him a Wildatarian, and he had his amino acid. You might know who he is. I'm not going to mention him by name, but he's considered one of the greatest boxers of all time. And when we made him a Wildatarian, his amino acid utilization went through the roof. And I was his metabolic expert on his team, and he was punching like he was 25 at age 53. So that was part of the deal. And so his amino acid utilization was optimal. And he tried all sorts of diets as well. And most recently, Anthony Kiedis, the lead singer of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, went viral. I went viral, respectively, on Joe Rogan when Anthony Kiedis, as a guest, mentioned that he'd had all these issues with not being able to heal from injuries and had tried all diets. And when he went wild, he said it was the fastest, the sharpest, the most mental sharpness, the most agility he's ever had in his life. And he's 61. And so he went wild, and the amino acid utilization for him went through the roof. Not only did he become the best shape of his life, but everything else, all the inflammatory agents that was keeping him from being his best self, evaporated. And so he no longer eats chicken. And so these are, two major players, one by name, one by not, that when we changed their profile of eating, they became the best versions of themselves and became more cut than ever. So broke down, anything that they had. So we effectively maximized the human potential when we look and seek to understand how is that body breaking down proteins and fats.
So awesome. And so back to the fats and fat malabsorption. Can you explain that again for everybody to understand? Because, we're not eating sugar. We're on a low carb diet. We can eat all the fat we want. I know for me, I will get nauseous if my liver needs cleaning or I'm not able to break down my fats very well. I will get nauseous when I eat too fatty of a meal, and I use my liver flushes to help with that. And I know we've talked about some supplements that help with supporting the liver, which is really important. You got to love your liver through all of this and everything that's going on too. But can you explain the fat malabsorption concept again?
Yeah. So just because we need fat for our brain and for our muscles and for our collagen structure and for even our myelin, which that is the nerve coating that protects our nerves, doesn't mean that we should burden our body with fat if we can't break it down. So when you burden a body with high fat and you have genetic tendencies that don't allow you to break down fat, it's sort of like trying to put an elephant through a meat grinder. It's not going to be pretty, right? So what's going to happen is the liver, which is one of the liver and the lymph are two main sources of how we break down fat, right? Because the liver makes bile, which is an emulsifier of fats, and the lymph's second role, our lymphatic, the whole lymphatic system, its second role is actually fat metabolism. Mm-hmm. And so when we don't have the foundational elements, such as sufficient bile salts, because we have the MTHFR C677T, or we have the APO gene, so we're not breaking down cholesterol, which is also linked to Alzheimer's, or we have the VDR TAC gene that doesn't break down vitamin D, or we have the MTHFR C677T polymorphism that doesn't allow us, again, to break down to make bile, but it also recycles estrogen, which is a fat, and recycles just fats in general. Or we have the COMP gene, which recycles estrogen and other fats and other catechols, which are also fat soluble. When we have a lot of the PEMT gene that doesn't make, you have insufficient choline stores. Choline is very important for DNA methylation. Also, it's an emulsifier. Then when we have those genetic tendencies and we put in fat to make hormones to balance fat or to not eat carbs, you're effectively creating a concrete parking lot in your liver. And then the liver is going to send it to the lymph, these undigested fats, and then we're going to get fluffy. And then when we can't break down our fats, they're not going into our cells. So these hormones are no longer going into our cells. And so they're floating around in the interstitial fluid, hanging around, being all fluffy and fatty. And then when we can't break down insulin going into our cells, then we have a real problem, because not only are we going to store it, because what does fat do? It is adipose tissue. It becomes stored, right? So fat not used becomes stored. That means we become fluffy. And the fat also carries a toxic burden, because fats hold toxins. So now we're holding more fluff, and we're a bigger toxic burden to our cells. Okay. And when we can't break down fats, especially for women, then our endocrine cycles and our menstrual cycles become dysregulated, and then not breaking down estrogen in particular. Now we've got a big problem, because estrogen feeds candida, the beast of yeast, which has multiple downstream impacts. Because how does candida protect itself? Through a lipid layer. How does the coronavirus protect itself? Through a lipid layer. How do viruses protect themselves? Through these caspid layers that are lipid-like. So now we're also giving rise to all these pathogens, which then further turn on our genes against our favor, which then leads us to all these wild potential autoimmune conditions or worse. So not understanding the way that we can break down fats and what our genetic vulnerabilities are can help us or hurt us. And so, for example, we're considered fertility experts. We take clients that have been rejected from major fertility clinics here in the DC area. Why were they infertile? Because they couldn't break down their fats. And what do fertility clinics do? They give you a bunch of hormones. You have to know how to break down your fats so you can manage your estrogen, your progesterone, your testosterone, and your insulin, and your thyroid hormone so you can be fertile. We actually recently had a gentleman at 35 that was told, you're infertile. He went through one of the biggest nutrigenomic outfits in the country for epigenetics. And they're like, oh my God, you have all these fat metabolism impairment genes. So you're not making testosterone. So we're going to pump you full of fat. So we're going to be a bunch of testosterone and a bunch of human growth hormone and all these fats so we can make you have a baby. Well, it totally backfired on him. His adrenals crashed. Mm-hmm. So one visit with us, and we said, whoa, stop the horses here. You got to do no fats. We got to find out a way to break down your fats so you can actually make your own testosterone. And so with one visit with us, his wife is due in May.
Oh, I just got the chills.
He has a baby boy. Similarly, I had an emergency room doctor who, he's an overnighter, so he does the night shift out in NOLA. Shout out to NOLA. And he was taking testosterone because he was building testosterone, and it was making him fluffy. And it was also affecting his other neurohormones. And as an ER doctor, you're really on the, first, the vocation itself makes you be on high alert. And two, he was upside down in his sleep cycle. So I said, I'm going to pull you off in concert with your doctor, pull you off your testosterone. I will double your testosterone by breaking down your fats. And that's exactly what we did. So we doubled his testosterone, not by giving him testosterone, by taking away the testosterone that was too heavy for him. And he lost weight. So at the end of this, the thing is, when you're breaking down fats, you're breaking down fats on every level, not only inside, but outside.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You just opened a can of worms there. And I want to get into, well, why don't we do it right now? The testosterone. Can you dive deeper into what you did or how you approach it factually with supplements or diet support to increase the testosterone on an unnatural basis? Because that's what men will do. They'll reach for the TRT and hey, it must be my testosterone. I'm losing definition. My muscle mass is going down and my fat is going up, feeling fluffy. Let's pump ourselves with testosterone. Can you explain why that doesn't work, which you did, but also now what do you do to improve the testosterone and the fat loss?
So first of all, we had to figure out what other pathogens were also making him fat malabsorbed and using the fat to bolster themselves. So he had candida, a lot of candida, which is, I call it the jelly donut, the beast of yeast in the jelly donut, because it wraps itself in a lipid layer. So candida will also increase estrogen because candida and estrogen recycle. So we had to get rid of the candida so his estrogen levels would go down. So his, just by relative nature of estrogen to testosterone, the testosterone levels will naturally rise. Then we gave him a whole bunch of fat metabolizing agents. We gave him calcium deglucarate, which breaks down fat, which is an aromatase inhibitor, which breaks down estrogen, which is a liver protector. We gave him bile salts, which salts will break down fats. We gave him, again, anti-candida protocol. We gave him grapefruit seed extract. We gave him my wild lights, which are also emulsifiers with the sea salt in there and the cilantro and watermelon, which manages oxalate metabolism, because candida will also increase oxalate burden. We know that. The arabinose, which is the byproduct of candida, typically you'll see those on an oat test and they'll be elevated jointly. So we had to manage his oxalate burden. So we also took him off of any foods that were oxalate rich. We took him away from foods that were sulfur rich, and we took him away from high fat foods. We also gave him a very, very gentle adrenal support because his adrenals were wrecked. But we needed to turn them on, but we did it very gently. So we did an adrenal glandular, but it was done once a week, not every day, because if we give it to him every day, there's too much fat. We also, second phase, we considered 7-keto DHEA that's a precursor to DHA, which will increase testosterone, but 7-keto doesn't convert to estrogen. So all of those things, right? And we always have to watch his candida. So he can't go almonds and berries and spinach. That sounds so delicious and healthy, and that will kick his butt. And every time he goes off the Teri ranch and he goes too fat, because he's a biohacker. This guy's a biohacker. He's an entrepreneur biohacker. I'm like, you went off the Teri ranch. Now his wife is pregnant. We're good, but he doesn't feel as well. And when he came back to see me recently, he's like, oh my God, okay, I went off the Teri ranch. I got to go on these emulsifiers. And again, his body is now ripped. He's ripped, which he wasn't before. He was really underweight and fluffy.
So when you say the Teri Ranch, and we know you're talking about wild meats, but you're also talking about not too much fat. So are you saying that this person needs to be on the leaner side of the wild meat? So maybe not the ribeyes, the bison ribeyes, but more of the fillets.
Well, and also he could probably do that, but he started taking, he went off the Teri Ranch supplementally, and he started taking a lot of fat soluble vitamins, started taking a lot of essential fatty acids again. He started doing a lot of oils. No, right? He started doing some supplements that had some oxalates in there, like oregano. No, and other things in mushrooms. Mushrooms will feed the candida. So, yeah. So, and he knew, he's like, Teri, you're right. That was not the right thing to do. But we get brainwashed by, everybody's doing, this is the new craze and this is going to make you blah, blah, blah. Well, he cognitively was not even as sharp, because what does the brain need? It's 60% fat or more, just between 60 and 70%. That's what the clinical studies show. So if you can't break down fat, you're going to be less smart. It's not cognitively optimal.
Okay. So now let's get into the spike protein and its relationship with this unexplained weight gain, because so many people are, number one, hypothyroidism is shooting through the roof. So you've got a thyroid issue and autoimmune issue, obviously. But this unexplained weight gain, and people just think, oh, well, I'm in my 40s now. It's hormonal. This is what's supposed to happen. That's not the case. You are not meant to look worse, carry excess weight as you get older. That is not what's supposed to happen. So can you explain what is going on in mass populations with this unexplained weight gain?
Yes, I'm calling it the COVID-19. So we used to have the freshman 15. I call it the COVID-19. So what's happening is, and this is all in the clinical literature, is the spike protein, however it gets into your body, we're equal opportunity spike protein, right? And 90, if we're on the planet, we've been exposed. unless you live in a cave and are self-sufficient and can eat mushrooms from the cave and don't have a mold issue. The spike protein takes angiotensin converting. I'm getting a super nerdy here. Takes angiotensin converting enzyme. That's the way it brings itself into the cells. Once that happens, there are two angiotensin converting enzymes, 1 through 7. It gets converted to angiotensin converting enzyme 2. What happens there is 1 through 7 has to do with lipid and water, how we manage our water internally, how we manage our antidiuretic hormone, how we manage our insulin and our lipids, how we manage our follicular function. And it goes sideways. It turns to angiotensin converting enzyme 2, and that's going to be disruptive to insulin. It's going to be disruptive to our follicular function, both testicular and ovarian. It's going to be disruptive to our fluid balance. It's going to be disruptive to our histamine receptor, which becomes an excitatory, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, which it becomes like a cortisol epinephrine type thing that's then going to feed the dirty cupcake. But what's so fascinating is when this happens, GABA, which is an amino acid, becomes depleted. GABA is what holds insulin's hand to go into our cells. Mm-hmm. GABA is what helps in our So GABA is found in 3 primary locations: the central nervous system, the ovaries, and the pancreas. And you're getting breaking news here. I'm not sharing this publicly yet. When that happens and GABA is disrupted, so GABA in the ovaries keeps estradiol, which is our happy estrogen, happy. When GABA is depleted, we have an esterone that is then converted. That's a bad estrogen. That's the kryptonite estrogen. And so estrogen unabashed is going to make you fluffy. Estrogen is going to feed candida. Candida then will impair the body's ability to convert T4, which is a thyroid hormone, into T3, which is the active hormone. So now you got a thyroid issue just from that alone, right? So hypothyroidism because the estrogens run unabashed, and your fat malabsorption, your insulin is screwed. So 3 things cause the thyroid binding globulin to be exerted, which binds the thyroid hormones from entering the cells: insulin, cortisol, testosterone. Okay. I'm sorry, insulin, cortisol, estrogen. So those 3 things are now also whacking the thyroid from moving it, so that the actual hormones from moving into the cells. And this is where it confuses the doctors. Are like, well, your numbers are normal, but you're not using it because it's not going into your cells. Mm-hmm. And then, because the spike protein is so evil, we now know in the clinical literature that it's returning on herpes viruses, and that herpes virus includes Epstein-Barr, cytomegalo, herpes, varicella zoster. And so what is Hashimoto's? And I'm an expert in that. And we know that over 80% of Hashimoto's clinically shown is a reactivation of the Epstein-Barr virus. Hashimoto's is the autoimmune version of hot thyroiditis. Also, over 60% of Graves' disease, which is the hyperthyroid autoimmune, is also that. And some people are having Graves' disease and gaining weight because you've got all these other issues too. So the viral component, the bacterial component, fungal component from Candida, the testicular and ovarian component of hormone dysregulation, the insulin component, the water fluid component is messing us up big time.
And I've experienced all that you're talking about. The water fluidity in my body. It's like, whoo! I mean, you can go up 5 pounds just with water weight, and you don't know, you didn't eat anything wrong. You're doing all the right things. And oh my gosh, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And I can also speak to, we're in the next conversation we have, we'll get in deeper into fertility and menstrual cycles, but I can just tell you that within my own household, the menstrual cycles and the PMS symptoms have gotten significantly worse in the last 2 years. And I've been hearing that from a lot of women. It goes right along with the fertility issues that you're seeing as well. So to be able to reverse that and normalize it, and we've, in my own house, we've seen a drastic improvement with some of the things that you're talking about, and then a couple other things that we've added in. And thank goodness, because as a mom, there's nothing worse than seeing your daughter in severe pain and you can't do anything about it. So,
well, actually, my daughter called me and said, I'm passing out from ovarian pain.
Yes, I'm getting those calls.
And GABA and Serrapeptase really helped her. I mean, she just, and the magnesium, there's lots of things, but yeah, so now she's managing it. But yes, absolutely.
And so what I wanted to really dive into, because those are 3 of the things that we have incorporated with my daughter, is GABA, which everyone thinks of, oh, well, GABA is just the brain hormone to calm me down. But obviously GABA has so many more things that it's doing in the body in relation to what we're talking about. But can you talk about Serrapeptase? This is something that actually factually, and I don't know, all of you moms out there know that when you give your kids something and it doesn't work, they will have no problem telling you it doesn't work, right? So when they actually tell you it works, you know you've done something good. The Serrapeptase was key for her turnaround. So if you could describe what that is and how that is working in the body.
So Serrapeptase is a proteolytic enzyme. I call it a Pac-Man of debris. So it's like a little Pac-Man that eats all this debris. And so there's actually some clinical literature shows that Serrapeptase can attenuate that spike protein, right? So that really helps. But Serrapeptase also, because I use Serrapeptase in viral cases when there's no demyelination, because it helps eat that, that it's a proteolytic enzyme. So it proteins, right? So proteins in particular, and you take it between meals. So why Serrapeptase is also really important, back to the frickin' spike protein, and it's reactivating these viruses. What we're seeing very much so is the varicella virus is hanging out in women's ovaries, and varicella has been tied to PCOS. And so that's polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I call it polycystic ovarian syndrome-esque, because you don't have to be necessarily diagnosed with it, but you're symptomatic. And so, and we've now seen it over and over and over in my practice, where we actually had someone that was regularly passing out, a 35-year-old passing out with pain from her cycle, like she actually stopped having cycles. And not even morphine was touching it. No pain was touching it. So she stopped having cycles, just unbelievable pain. So we put her on this proteolytic enzyme in concert with the doctor, along with an antiviral. Within 3 days, she got her period, and within 2 weeks, she had no pain.
Wow.
So it was a viral expression in the ovaries that were making her have this extenuating pain. And my daughter did the same thing within just a couple of days of that combo platter, including GABA, because GABA also will manage that estrogen. So what happens too is that estradiol is really important to manage that bad estrogen. Also, GABA is an antispasmodic. So there's cramping. The GABA helps manage that massive cramping that women have when they're releasing an egg during that ovulation and at that end of that the beginning of the cycle with the cramping to shed the uterine lining. And so super important for that. Super important. I mean, again, Sarah, this is freaking groundbreaking. I don't know of anyone else that understands this the way we do in our practice. I'm very proud of these discoveries, and we're really helping women in particular. We're seeing women now as young as 23 years old actually having hysterectomies because the endometrial growth is it's out of control.
Are you seeing an increase in endometriosis and fibroids and all of those diseases?
Enormous increase. I mean, I've never heard of a 23-year-old who had a hysterectomy, and again, exposure to the spike protein, not saying how, after they did an endometrial scrape, she had end-stage endometriosis again in 2 months. So then they're saying you have to take out things. She got to keep her ovaries. So, but the thing that is so tragic here is that because they needed to do an egg retrieval for her, so she could potentially have eggs for her future children, they pumped her full of estrogen to retrieve the eggs. which is the problem anyway, because she was high estrogen, which caused the endometrial tissue. So it's like, I call it butchery. And we're helping her. And now when she doesn't take, so now she's had this situation, we got her on the other side of her operation. But when she doesn't take her supplements, she feels the difference. She lives in California now. We just saw her. And yeah, she tells me, in our team, I can't function without the supplements.
And what you're describing is what my daughter was going through, where she literally was yelling at me, "Mom, I can't go on anymore. I can't." And she weighs all of 110 pounds, and 3 Advil wouldn't even touch the pain. I didn't even want her to take the Advil, but even when she did, it was like it did not even touch it. So it is something has to change, because that is not any way for anyone to live. So we talked about serrapeptase, we talked about GABA, you mentioned magnesium. Where does magnesium fall in?
Well, magnesium has multiple folds. One, it's an antispasmodic. So again, this cramping it's just contractions, right? And so magnesium actually has been used for many years to stop a heart attack. Because it calms that contraction. So similarly in the ovaries, you're having these very, very exacerbated contractions. Magnesium's also it manages the adrenals. So when again, it's like, the neck bone's connected to the whatever shoulder bone, everything's connected. And so when other hormones are being taxed, the adrenals are also being taxed, and then the thyroid's being taxed, everything is a domino effect. So by supporting with magnesium, you're getting an antispasmodic, you're giving support to the adrenals, you're getting mineralized, and it's the right mineral. It's a base, it's not an acid. So very, very important.
You mentioned before we came on oxidated iron. Where does iron play into this? And I know Morley Robbins has been on my show, and you know him and his push for copper, and it's not an iron issue, it's a copper issue. Can you talk about the balance of iron and copper in the body, and where does that come into play?
Yeah, well, Morley and I have become very tightly aligned. Actually, I'm seeing him this week for dinner. So he's a genius. And if you haven't read his book, The Cure, CU, as in copper, RE, it's really a fascinating and groundbreaking book. So I applaud Morley for his tenacious efforts to bring this truth to the world. I consider him a preeminent expert in this discipline of this awareness. And so what we know is the spike protein depletes copper, and our entire farming system has depleted copper. And zinc, guess what, folks? Dirty little secret about zinc, which we all took multiple folds of, and our early in the pandemic, depletes copper. So we have copper depleted. When copper is an iron balancer. So when copper gets depleted, it runs unabashed. And so what happens is you're creating a reactive oxygen species when copper is depleted. And so iron unabashed. So this is what's really interesting too. And again, I found the literature in this is iron makes amyloids. So does a spike protein, has 7 vectors of amyloidogenesis. Iron becomes a lipid like, so there's the fat guys, fat metabolism impairment. Okay. Oxidated iron will create reactive oxygen species, and you need copper and magnesium to convert that oxygen into carbon dioxide and water, which actually fuels your mitochondrial function for ATP, which is the power plant to our cells, folks. We have no power. Our cells aren't working. And so iron has become a really big deal. We're seeing people who had low iron historically have high iron. And Morley's genius says, hey, guys, really, really very, very few people are iron deficient because it's just hidden in your tissues, and copper is the one that makes it bioavailable. Point in fact, I had a client who had her irons were single digits, and they're like, her functional doctors convinced her to get an iron transfusion. Her iron went to 600, and it tripped a massive downstream, horrible autoimmune response for her. She didn't need iron and a blood transfusion. She needed bioavailable iron so it could be brought into her cells through the copper support. So I'm really bullish, and I've been using, Sarah, I applaud you for your scalar activated copper. I've been giving it to almost every one of my clients of late. Very few people can't take it unless you have a lot of tremendous heavy metals and you're demyelinated. But it's a game changer. We have to create bioavailable iron so it can be brought into the cells instead of hanging out. And also, I will tell you, is people are needing to be phlebotomized. We're seeing iron levels super high. And actually, my own case, pre-COVID, when I had my 7 dwarfs of my viruses turn on because of a life event transition that stressed me into a viral reactivation, I was less equipped then to manage the mind-body experience. My iron went, for the first time in my life, went high, and I had to be phlebotomized. Why? Because iron, the viruses tripped my inability to process iron appropriately, and my iron went through the roof. First time in my life. And now I manage a moderate to high iron level, but now I'm doing copper. And I actually took a copper peptide IV the other day, and it was game changing for me. So it's really, really important that we understand the detrimental effects of iron, because iron becomes a fire starter for fat metabolism impairment, for viral reactivation, for pathogenic loads, and for that biofilm creation.
Copper's been huge with me, as I had it right here, just taking it right before we got on. I have explained that my other daughter has been anemic since the moment she came out of the womb, and everyone's put her on iron supplements, and it wasn't until Morley talked to me about getting a blood test done and getting her on copper, that copper is the key that unlocks the door to get the iron where it needs to go. And it's been a game changer in our family as well. So we've touched on a lot of the supplements that you are using and some of the diet. The one I want to touch on is choline and inositol, because that seems like it's a game changer for people as well.
So choline and inositol, there are many forms of choline. So phosphatidylcholine is not the same as choline and inositol. And if they say you need choline and you take phosphatidylcholine, which is fat-based, and you have a fat metabolism issue, you're screwed. Okay. Plus, most of the phosphatidylcholine is derived from soy, which is also estrogenic. And I know people say that soy is a phytoestrogen. It's a good estrogen. Right now, estrogen is unabashed. It's becoming estrone. Oof, anything that's soy derived, guys, wow, you need to really be careful. So choline and inositol is different. So choline, especially with that PEMT gene and the COMT gene, where you're likely to have low choline stores and you recycle estrogen. Choline is really important for DNA methylation, super important. And the inositol is I believe it's B7, but don't quote me, I don't want to get that wrong. It helps with insulin. That's why the myo and chiro inositol is so popular for PCOS and insulin dysregulation. So I consider choline actually another one of those scrubbers. It's a scrubber, it's an emulsifier. It manages DNA methylation, which then manages the bile synthesis, which then manages the fat metabolism, which then helps hormone function. But particularly for my fertility clients, choline is critical, and it's really important through the entire fertility piece and the pregnancy, and is just a hormone regulator, especially if you have the MTHFR C677T polymorphism or the COMT polymorphism. Those choline has helped many with those. It's helped many with as with PCOS. I use it for PCOS. My daughter had a version of PCOS after a belly conservatory, gave her one supplement and threw all her genes out when she was 17. So she uses that regularly as well. So women with PCOS, we put them on choline, we put them on that serrapeptase if it's, virally driven. We put them on the choline, the myo and chiro inositol, so additional inositol support for insulin is a PCOS. I consider insulin the center spike around the other hormone dysregulators.
And I'm one of those PCOS people, and so is my daughter, taking the choline and inositol and all the other things that we talked about. With the diet, we are eating wild. We're staying away from oxalates. but where do we just have a couple minutes? Can you just touch on sulfur and why some of those foods can trip up the pathways? Because the sulfur vegetables are the low carb, healthy, low cal vegetables that we're all eating, wondering why we're getting fluffy. So where do the sulfur vegetables come in?
Well, back to especially now in this environment with glyphosate, the Roundup spray, the active ingredient in Roundup has slashed and burned our body's ability to convert sulfur to sulfate, which is actually what we need. And that's why those sulfur cruciferous vegetables and the other sulfur compounds in our food supply, before we totally just fire started our entire soil and the quality of our food, they were actually good. However, glyphosate turned the tables, and now sulfur is a problem, very big problem. As a matter of fact, the woman that I shared with you earlier on the program, where we were able to convert 3 autoimmune conditions into clinically no antibodies and even aplastic anemia, her hemoglobin was normal, and she's had vitiligo for 5 years, and the melanin is coming back. And now the sun that used to make her whiter is making her actually tan. So in her case, sulfur, oxalate, and viruses were her jam, along with the staph. So why is sulfur such a problem? Well, the glyphosate, that Roundup, and then spike protein. Hey, here we go again. So the spike protein turns on the histamine response. The histamine and sulfur are literally linked at that phase 1 liver detoxification pathway. So now we got the histamine messing up the sulfur, and we got the glyphosate messing up the sulfur, and we're messed with sulfur. So if you have any genetic tendencies, and even if you don't, we're seeing so many people screwed by taking in broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and arugula and bok choy and killer kale. That is not good, you guys. People, and I talk about that. I've been putting it on my Instagram accounts, and they're like, but kale is so good for you. And I'm like, no, it's not. No. But I've been told to eat kale. Well, stop eating kale.
So let me, because we're out of time, Teri, and that's why we're going to have you back on. But just in my own house, low cal kale smoothie, snacking on almonds, and there's no results. Feeling brain fog, feeling lethargic, feeling fluffy, feeling awful. So my question to all of you listening was, when you're listening to Teri going, I don't know about what she's talking about, how are you feeling? No, I'm just saying in general to people, what you're doing working? Is what you're doing working? Might stop you in your tracks and start to think of things a different way. So Teri, we are out of time. Can you please tell everybody where to find you and your amazing book as well?
Yes. So tericochrane.com. We have a ton of blogs. I'm on Instagram. That's a really, really good place to get information, and Facebook. Please buy my book. I believe it's a game-changing book. I wrote it 5 years ago, but we're always adapting through our Instagram, and I'll eventually update that. I'm no longer taking new clients right now. We're just so full capacity. So that is off the table right now, as we try to get more insular, so then we can bring it to a broader audience on a mass scale. So to be, shared at a later date. But we do believe that even with information alone, you literally can change your life. By food alone, your life can change. And that is not an overstatement. I've seen it over and over again. And you can do everything right, and you get the foods wrong, and you will still have the wrong outcome.
Yep. Well, I'm a student of Teri's, and if you, as she's not taking clients, join my free group coaching, because I implement her philosophies, and I work very closely with Teri for a reason. Obviously, you guys can see how brilliant she is, and her team is as well. So thank you, Teri, and check out her on social media. Definitely read the book. It's a great way to get a basis for what she is talking about. So thank you, Teri, and thank you everyone else for joining me. You can contact me directly through my website, sarabantahealth.com. Happy to put together a protocol for you. But join the free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. We will be talking about everything that Teri went over today and all of her philosophies and the protocols. It sounds complicated. It's not as easy as what they want to make us think of as calories in, calories out. So we go over all of those and the whys, so that you really deeply understand how to implement these things in your lifestyle. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Accelerated Health Products and across over 100 channels under Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show, including YouTube, Stitcher, Pandora, Apple, or whatever podcast platform you subscribe to. Use coupon WELCOME10 for 10% off site-wide, and join us every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific and Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. And thank you again for joining us here on Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show.